Hello my friends and welcome once again to this Red Gaming Tech video. Myself, Marta. I hope you guys are having a good day. I'm here as always with the latest news from the tech world in the last 24 or so hours as of the 23rd of June. Now we're going to begin things today with some alleged specs that have leaked for the 3080 Ti. So, this has leaked on Twitter thanks to Cyberpunk Cat. You can of course find their tweet linked below. So, what do we have? Let's go through the specs and then I'll talk about all my, shall we say, skepticism surrounding this. So we see Nvidia Ampere GA102-400A1 RTX 3080 Ti, GA102 5376 CUDA cores, 7nm boost core frequency of 2200 MHz and 21 T-flops, and although it is slightly cut off, you can also see Samsung GDDR6. So, there's a lot here that doesn't make sense in all honesty. The first thing is the name. Now obviously we don't know what Nvidia is going to be calling the GPUs in the next generation. There's been lots of reports from pretty reliable sources that Nvidia will not be using the 3080 Ti this time around, the name that is, and instead we're going to be seeing a 3090 card doing the rounds. Now obviously that is just a rumour, but it has come from lots of reliable sources. My real concerns are with the specs. So you can see here that it's 21 T-flops, but let's break that down. Let's look at the CUDA cores as the starting point, 5376. So you multiply that by the boost frequency, which obviously is 2200, and then you multiply that by 2, because it does 2 operations per clock, and that would bring you to 23.6 T-flops. Obviously here we're seeing 21. So that means, or could mean, a few things. It could be that Nvidia are listing the base frequency or the boost frequency, which is way lower than what's here. But to be honest, given that we have seen people like a PT7 Kimmy, hopefully I pronounced that correctly, on Twitter, who have a pretty damn good track record when it comes to leaking accurate information for Nvidia hardware, leaking completely different specifications as well as everything I just said, I'm leaning more towards Kapiti's information and leaning more towards this information just being either fake or just incorrect or possibly both. Either way, I'm not going to focus too much on this. I just wanted to mostly talk about why I think this is inaccurate, because there's a few discrepancies. You know, the TDP versus the TGP, the T-flops are wrong, and GDDR6 versus GDDR6X. None of this lines up with previous leaks, so make of it what you will. So, let's move on to some very interesting news for Apple. So, Apple are making what they are calling a pretty historic move, and that is according to the Apple CEO Tim Cook. So basically, Apple are going to be switching Macs to their own processors starting later this year. And this is going to be an ARM-based Mac that is going to be available, obviously, as I said, at the end of 2020. Now, Apple aren't moving exclusively to ARM-based Macs just yet. Intel-powered Macs are still in the pipeline, but this is still a pretty big shift, for Apple to move away from Intel-based silicon in Macs to obviously ARM-powered chips. Apple is designing its own range of SoC for Macs with features unique to Macs themselves. And the common ARM-based architecture across Apple's products is obviously going to make life a lot easier for developers. And Craig Federighi, hopefully I pronounced that name correctly, who is Apple's Senior Vice President of Software Engineering, said, quote, "The vast majority of developers can get their apps up and running in a matter of days." Now, they also introduced something called the Mac OS Big Sur, which is the next major release for Mac OS and gives the biggest update in, quote, more than a decade, and basically is helping to ensure a smooth transition to the Apple-based silicon. They're also launching something called the Universal App Quick Start program, which provides access to documentation, forum support, beta versions of the new OS, and limited use of something called the Developer Transition Kit, which is a development system based on the A12Z Bionic System on Chip, or SoC. Apple are planning to ship the first Mac with Apple Silicon, as I've already said, by the end of the year, but they are planning to complete this transition in about 2 years. Apple, however, will continue to support and release new versions of macOS for Intel-based Macs for years to come, and as I've already said, has Intel base Macs already in development. So, long story short, they are going to continue to support the Intel base Macs on the OS side, as well as, of course, developing the actual hardware. But after a few years, we will see the transition completed, and assuming this doesn't blow up in their face completely, they will switch to ARM-based pretty much all over their entire ecosystem, at least on the Mac side. Now, you are most likely remembering the fact that rumours have been doing the rounds for ages that Apple were thinking of transitioning away from Intel to ARM. And these reports have suggested that this move was prompted by their slowing performance gains, that being, of course, Intel. And the whole shortage thing that I'm sure you're sick of hearing about probably didn't help. Also, the Citi analyst Jim Suva basically says that Apple can save a ridiculous amount of cash by doing this. They can save up to $850 million per year, and again, that is according to a Citi analyst. And you can find my source for that linked below, as well as, of course, the source for the press release that I've been looking at for this information. So, it's going to be interesting to see what the fallout is from this. Intel losing Apple is obviously going to sting, even for a big company like them, so it's going to be one to watch for sure. But we've got a console-focused end of the video coming up with a few topics, first of which is some comments from EA themselves. To be specific, this was the EA Chief Studios Officer Laura Mealy, and she was speaking with Games Industry. Of course, you can find the full interview linked in the description, as always. And she was basically asked if the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X offer enough for players to, plonk down the cash. And she said, quote, "Actually, I don't think it's going to be a problem. During my first demo, when I experienced the instant load times and massive worlds, I knew immediately this was going to set a new bar in terms of player expectations. When players see how accessible and immersive this generation of technology is, there will be no turning back. Historically, console transitions have been punctuated by increased graphic fidelity, and that hasn't changed. This next gen of games will certainly take a visual leap. We are also taking advantage of the extra memory and CPU cycles to bring a lot more detail to life. As an example, in Madden we'll be using the NFL's next-gen stats, so every athlete in the game will play how they do in real life, with the data being updated in real time. Fans in the stadium will be unique people responding to action on the field. Deferred rendering allows us to use colours and lights in more dynamic ways, and dynamic weather systems will impact the athletes, their equipment, and the playing field. Games are going to feel different, better, and more visceral." And this is pretty much what we've been saying, as well as obviously many other people, that it's not just about the increase in visuals, it's about everything that's going on with both of the systems. The Xbox Series X and the PlayStation 5 are bringing a lot to the table than just, hey, the graphics look prettier now, which obviously is good, don't get me wrong, but all this other stuff is going to be really, really interesting. I mean, just to focus on the PS5 just for a second, when we saw the game reveals, the Ratchet and Clank game that we saw, where they were able to instantly, pull themselves into a portal, and instantly there'll be some, the area would change and enemy positions, and it would be loading as you're doing it, and it was instant. So that's a game that's coming out either as a launch game or in the first few months. I can't actually remember the release date off the top of my head, but regardless of that, it's still an early game in the game's life cycle, and we're already seeing how the SSD is being used, and I think we're going to be seeing those sorts of things come into play a lot with both of the systems. Xbox Series X and PS5 are going to bring a lot of interesting stuff to the table for developers to play with that is more than just raw graphics output. And speaking of the next generation, we have some comments about the Xbox Series X this time around. So, these comments come to us from Jason Ronald, the Director of Program Management for the Xbox Series X. And he was speaking to Games Radar, and of course, again, yes, you can find that linked below. So, in this particular interview, he was focusing on the SSD and the innovation that Microsoft has been looking for and how the SSD makes it possible. He said, quote, "With past console generations, the primary focus has been on graphics improvements, and with the next generation, we'll continue to see a step change in graphical fidelity. But more importantly, with this generation is the power that you can feel. Internally, we think about this as the power you can see as well as the power you can feel. When we talk about the power you can feel, this really is about changing how games actually play. Things like ultra high frame rates, ultra low latency input, and how quickly and easily we can get players to jump into the experience. And the virtual elimination of loading times. It's really much more about how games play and how games feel than just looking at the graphics advancements alone. And he also said that the SSD is, quote, the foundation of the Xbox Velocity architecture and is a radical reinvention of how game asset streaming works. It really is about putting the power in the hands of the player to make sure they're able to experience those transformative experiences the game developers have created for the Xbox Series X. So again, not just about graphics. The SSD is going to be huge for the Xbox Series X as well as everything else under the hood that we will surely see developers talk about more and obviously show more in their games after they won't break infinite NDAs by talking about them. So I'm really excited for this generation, to be honest. I'm really interested to see what exactly developers do with all this newfound power. Because we are going to hit a wall eventually with graphics. I don't know if we've reached that point yet. I can't see into the future. And it's going to be more about how everything else can be improved. You know, frame rates and latency and no loading times and all that weather stuff and the crowds for Madden. I mean, Madden's not really my sort of thing, to be honest. I'm not into sports games, but it interests me just from a pure technical perspective and how that would really increase your immersion in the game itself. So it's going to be very, very exciting times. I'm looking forward to the next Xbox event, which, as if I recall correctly, is coming out, or will be shown, I should say, in July. Really looking forward to seeing more games. Hopefully we'll get to see more gameplay this time, and just more games. You know what I'm hoping for, guys? Elden Ring. You know you wanna, Microsoft. You know you wanna. Alright, in all seriousness, guys, thank you so much for watching. As always, your support means a huge deal to both myself and Paul. Do remember to like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. It does help out a great deal. And I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.